Hello and welcome everybody to today's episode of the Conscious Grief series. I am very honoured to be with Olivia Bareham from Sacred Crossings. Sacred Crossings is the Institute for Conscious Dying and Alternative Funerals. Thank you very much for being here today, Olivia.
Oh, you're welcome, Tara. It's just a pleasure to talk about my favourite subject.
No, and Olivia is based in LA, but originally from England, as you can tell by the accent. And I came across Olivia's work while living in LA and have done 2 of your courses. I'm yet to complete, but I was very inspired by Olivia's work and all the amazing things that she's doing around conscious dying. So I'm excited to talk more about that today. I'd like to start, because this is the Conscious Grief series, asking what you feel your definition of grief is.
That's a very good question. I was just speaking to students about that this weekend, and there's a difference for me in grief and sorrow, and we were looking at what that might be. For me, sorrow is this open-hearted weeping for love of life. And with that love of life, when it collides with the anticipatory loss of life, there's even more love for it, if you will. So this sorrow is like an opening of the heart, and the tears are liquid love. You often see that at the end of life when the person will just literally weep, just tears will drip. And it doesn't feel like pain. It doesn't feel like grief. When somebody's at the end of their life, you often see tears as they weep because they love. They weep because they're really realizing in this moment their open-hearted surrender into, wow, all there is love. To me, that is the sorrow. And then the grief is when there's a longing for it. There's a longing for something that is no longer here. And that I correlate to an attachment. So they want something, so there's a clinging sensation to it, and then that is suffering. So for me, grief it can be associated with suffering, whereas sorrow is just an open-hearted expression of love that is lost. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes complete sense. And I really love the way you've articulated between those two things, because I think a lot of the time you think grief equals the sadness, but it's not. It's a lot more than that, like you were saying. Yeah, the attachment part and the sort of bargaining or the yearning for wanting something different. Yeah.
Exactly. It's when we can't accept what is. It's either the shock is so great, so the longing to have it back causes this disconnection, if you will, to the present moment, and everything's actually okay right now. And that grief is a feeling of it's contraction in the body, whereas sorrow is open. It's open-hearted, and which is one of the reasons that the home funeral assists in this process, because being present to the body, the dead body after death, helps the whole psyche to open to what's really happened. So the grief may turn to sorrow, which turns to final acceptance and loving, open awareness. And this takes a period of 3 days. And that's why we do what we do.
If we jump ahead too much, perhaps you could tell people about the work that you do and what led you to doing it.
Yes. So it all started when my own mum died. I went back to England to take care of her, and she was actually very conscious in her dying process. She had put her things in order. She was clear with her relationship with God. She didn't have any unresolved issues in her relationships. She was an incredible, loving, powerful woman who dedicated her life to service. So she was really good to go. So the actual dying piece was not, it wasn't one of suffering. None of us felt like we were suffering. There was sadness because of the loss. But again, sadness, grief, and sorrow, I think they're three different things. So, of course, there was weeping after she died. And that felt actually good to release that much love that I held for this amazing woman. But it was after she died when the hospice nurse came to the house and she said, Olivia, would you like to help prepare your mother's body? And that's when I said, yeah, of course. Can I? What does that look like? And that's when I stepped into this liminal space of holding Mum's body in my arms while the nurse sort of hummed a tune. And together we shared in this deeply intimate, profound moment of shrouding her, like putting her in her burial trousseau and swaddling her just as you do a newborn when they're born. And it was a visceral experience of the circle of life is now complete. Mum held me in my most vulnerable, in my first hours. I hold her in her most vulnerable, in her last hours as we swaddle her. And it just felt so perfect. And so the tears that I noticed that were falling, that's when I recognized that these tears were liquid love. It was just, thank you, I love you, thank you, I love you. That's all there was. So we laid her out, we put her in the living room, and I knew that I wanted this to go on for a little bit longer. I mean, this was so glorious. I wanted everyone who walked through the door to not be so, oh my God, Rosemary's dead. Oh, she looks quite nice. I'll have a cup of tea, please. You know, that sort of hurried business of whoa, whoa, because it's a lot to take in all of a sudden when somebody dies. It's a shock to the system and it takes a while to integrate. So I wanted everybody to come close, have a little bit more time, you know, open to this amazing thing. But there was a lot going on in the house. It was busy, you know, even though Mum was in the living room, it was also the dining room. So there was tea going on now and cucumber sandwiches and biscuits and dogs and kids. And it wasn't the quiet, I'm alone with my dead mother space that I was longing for, or I could feel that it was necessary for me to get another experience, an even deeper holding of what this was now that Mother's body was still, where was she? Can I take a deep enough breath and bring her in? But all of this, I felt like, oh, I just need a few more days, you know, I'll get this. There's something here for me, but, you know, you don't quite know what it is. And then when all the people had left, my sister said, well, I guess we got to call the funeral home now. And I remember feeling, let's keep her for a few more days. And this was like, you know, 16 years ago. And I didn't know then what I know now about preservation and dry ice. And so that's when I realized I didn't know. And in that not knowing, you feel sort of helpless. So you give up your authority or your innate intuitive knowing about something. We give it up to authority. And the authority in this case is the funeral home. And they know how to preserve this body. I don't. They know what to do next. I haven't got a clue, because that's been ripped out of our culture. We've given it up. So we called the funeral home. And when they took Mum's body and they squished it into the black body bag and zipped it up and put it on the gurney and wheeled it out over the snowy lawn, that's when I could feel that something's not right about this. I didn't know what it was, but I could feel that this was not right. But everybody does it, so you suck it up and get on with being busy and creating a wonderful funeral. service, which we did, and it was glorious. And as my sister kept telling me, oh, Livy, don't cry, because now I was crying a different kind of tears. Now that was mixed. Now this was mixed up with the grief, the longing. I wanted something back, but I didn't know what it was. I didn't want mum back necessarily. I wanted this opportunity to have a deeper experience back, and I felt like it had been ripped away. But so there, after the service, which was fabulous, of course, I came back to America, and it was my curiosity for, what have we done? This isn't right. I think we need to fix this. Just that. And I write about this. I think it's our curiosity that is this, is the seed of creativity. It's the seed of change and development and evolution. So I just had that deep desire for more information. And I found a wonderful woman in Northern California. Her name's Jerry Grace Lyons, who had been teaching home funerals for a while. So I went up and I took a training with her. I learned everything there was to learn about preservation of a body and keeping it at home and the home vigil. And I decided that I was going to help families keep this window open for a little more time so that they could have what I didn't get. And in so doing, I might be able to experience this 3 days. So that's what I do. That's what I did anyway for the first 7 years of my journey. But it's evolved since then, because I came in as a home funeral guide. And then that's developed into teaching people about how to prepare for this, and what's the benefit of this, and why would you even want it, and the deep spiritual teachings about the sacred 3 days that happens after death, and how that might help the grieving process, and how if you were allowed to be present to what is in a deep centered way, perhaps your own body could begin to heal and process the loss. Your pleasure. That means I spoke something true to you, apparently, when you see.
Yes, it's true, isn't it? I know. I was thinking it's so interesting, actually, because my mother's death was so similar in a sense to your mother's. And we had her at home, and we had her for the whole day and evening, and then the funeral directors came. And I think if we had known what I know now through meeting you, we would have definitely had kept the body at home for 3 days. And if someone had said to me before that about, having a dead body in the house, it would have felt like a scary thing. But I was with my mom when she died, and it wasn't scary at all. And we lay in bed with her, and in a way I was thinking, like, actually it was kind of amazing that we did what we did without any previous knowledge. But if more and more people knew about the kind of work that you do, and how this would really benefit the grieving process, like you were saying, and starting to talk about. So, I'd love to hear a little bit more about why you think we have become so removed from death. What happened?
Well, I think it was, it's been a slow process, not a long process, because, just 100 years ago, people were caring for their dead in the home, and it was the most natural thing on earth. So it was only when we literally gave up our authority and power to an industry, the funeral industry, that we began to become removed from it. And then I think that space between what we innately know and the skill of preparing a body, not that it's brain surgery or anything, we've lost that. We've also lost our connection to this thing called death. And death has become this fearful, scary, unknown thing. And we must bring it back so that we can live more empowered, alive lives. I think our lives are dead in many ways. People just don't wake up until they're about to die, sadly. And this is all part of this. So my goal here is to like awaken people to no, death is not scary, morbid, icky. It's your teacher. It will inform you. Lean in. You'll be happier because of it. I promise you.
And you were talking about the way you were describing your mom swaddling her, and you held her. She would have held you as a baby, and you call your the education death midwifery instead of the death doula, which I really love. And I recently did a yoga teacher training in the prenatal yoga, and so much was so similar to the training that I had done with you in terms of with birth. We've handed over a lot of the control, and it's become a medicalized hospital process, whereas years ago it would have been at home, as it was with death. And of course there's things where that I'm not saying that I'm anti hospital or anything like that, but it's very, very similar, isn't it, in a way, the death and the birth.
It's very similar. Life, there's gateways. We come in through a portal and we leave through a portal, and the midwife it actually means with woman. And the woman holds open these sacred portals into the other world. And it's so interesting when you look back on what happened with death has been co-opted by usually men in black suits, at least in the very beginning, and birth, when most doctors were men, with men in white suits. So it's just fascinating that happened, I think, with the patriarchal taking over of these sacred portals. But that's changing now. And as woman steps back in and we recognize the feminine nature of birth and death, and we're repairing it. It's happening.
It's happening. It's so interesting. So my next question was thinking about the having the body at home for a few days, the 3 days after the soul has passed on. Why is that a really helpful process for the loved ones? And maybe you could talk about some specific examples of work you've done recently.
Well, going back to what I said, I think it takes the psyche 3 days to fully integrate what just happened. Mum died is one thing, or mum's body stopped breathing. The body is still here, even though mum died, or her body died, which is the way I like to phrase it, when mum's body died. But she hasn't gone anywhere. So there's no shock, there's no trauma, there's no separation. And so the person goes to bed and they wake up the next morning, the body's still there. There's something going, oh, okay, wait a minute, I got this. Except this body is still, and now it's getting cold. It's never going to breathe again. It's never going to walk again, never going to talk to me again. And the brain can adjust now to this thing that's happening. So there's no wrenching. The person gets to sit next to the body and talk to it, cry at the realization, but it's not that kind of crying and longing, because it's still right there. And the presence of the loved one is still palpably there. And the second day, it diminishes a little bit. And the person who's coming into the room is realizing something else on a deeper level. This can't last forever. But now you're preparing the funeral service. You're inviting other people over. So you're putting yourself to work and using these rituals to process the loss, which I talk a lot about, is creating as many little rituals as possible within the home funeral ritual itself, to exactly do what you say, to begin to work the grief through the body somatically. So by the third day, they take it, almost everybody takes a deep breath, and you realize, okay, it's time to go now. It's amazing. It's just, it's a very organic, visceral thing. It's time to go. So they joyfully often put the body in the box because they're done. They've had their 3 days. And especially if they've had a chance to decorate the box or prepare the casket and make it it's their way of wrapping it into their final, I call it the envelope of love. It's like an envelope, you're sending it off and you're sealing it shut, and now it's done. And there's something about that. And so it is, and now it's done. And the family's fingerprints are all over it. No strangers come in. It's not been manipulated in any way, or it's been treated with loving kindness and respect, the way that they wanted it to. So almost always, well, I've never had an experience of a home funeral where somebody's been traumatized, because the body, it looks beautiful just the way it is. You know, nothing's happened to it. It doesn't look any different than it did 3 days before when the person was dying. Very seldom we don't even put makeup on. There's no need for makeup because the skin color hasn't really changed. The blood hasn't been drained out of them, so there's nothing really to do. It doesn't have holes in it where organs were punctured, so the body's not compromised. It's intact, and so I think that's very, very, very comforting to family members, and especially if it's a child, a mother especially, if a child dies, she needs time, and to have the body whisked away. And now the mother is in the home. I recently helped a family whose daughter had been dying for a while. I mean, she was born with a genital defect, so they'd always known that this would happen one day. But still, when the whole family's focus has been on the dying person, and now she's suddenly died, and now she's whisked away, you're going from such intense focus and richness and intimacy and love and people laying on the bed and being with her, to emptiness when the funeral home whisked it away. It's a shock. And now mom is bereft. But this mom, in this case, as she helped the other 2 sisters prepare the shroud and drape the bed and lay next to their sister while she, for the 3 days, it not only, it kept the family together, literally, because it gave them a focus. Even though now the body was dead, they were still taking care of it. Mm-hmm. And even she said, most people say they want to go into this work when they've experienced the depth of healing that preparing their loved one's body has done for them. They're the ones who come in to be death midwives and home funeral guides, because they get it. I mean, it's
yeah, it was coming to me how our culture has become so busy. Perhaps in the last year we've been able to slow down a little bit, but they're just taking those 3 days as well. So many people wouldn't take 3 days, would they? So just that, having the body there, having that ritual, doing the work of the sacred crossing, as you call it, just so healing. It's just remarkable. It really is.
Yeah, it's like you're weaving, you're putting yourself back together every time you touch the body, every time you change the flowers a little bit, or you rearrange the hair, and you come back in and you tuck a note inside, or you put it in a hand, or it gives you permission to get on with life, because you can keep coming back. And another interesting thing is that it takes, when the baby is born, it takes 3 days for the mother's milk to come in. It's as though it takes 3 days to fully get here. So it doesn't seem too far-fetched to imagine that maybe it takes 3 days to actually get out of here. And having your shell, which is what this is, laid out in honor, so that you, the awareness, whatever you believe the soul is, but it can now become familiar with its new form, and maybe it needs the opportunity to go back and forth like that for a few days, because on the third day, the shell does look and feel like a shell.
Right.
The energetic light body is fully gone now. I mean, I've never really experienced one more than maybe 3 or 4 days at the most. And the family recognized that too, and they've seen it happen. So they know too that now the loved ones.
Very interesting. Very, very interesting. Yeah, that you see that real shift on the third day. Yeah. And you also have been helping people with pets as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
We do exactly the same thing with the pet. And it's just so helpful. I mean, a pet is just is like a child, perhaps even more so, because people often express their love more openly and freely to their pet. So it's been more of an open flow, that whole relationship. And now it's gone. The person has no place to put this love. And just having the body there, so that it gives the person a little bit more time to still care for it. And it watches how the body becomes stiff and cold, and they know it can no longer give back what it was doing when it was warm and running around. It just makes it so much easier, rather than leaving it at the vets and getting that little box of ashes back. Like, what happened in between? You know, where was it? You know?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering, because you have a section in your death midwifery, which is conscious death.
Conscious dying, we call that.
Conscious dying, yes. And what would you say conscious grief looks like?
Conscious grief is giving yourself permission to be 100% present to the depth of your love / now loss. And it's a scary place to go, because it feels bottomless. But having the courage to step into that consciously, to me, that's conscious grief. And I think a lot of people get caught up in the emotion of sadness, which can loop sometimes for years, because they never consciously drop down into the sorrow of the loss. But it's a scary place to go. That's why few dare really go there, and or are able to tell the difference between the looping of the emotion and dropping down into it consciously.
There was an exercise that really stuck with me that we did about, you asked us to bring something really meaningful and we gave it away. And I just think that was so powerful. Would you share a little bit more about that teaching?
It's interesting. It came up in this last class too. Yes, I invite people to make a list of the 10 things that are most important to them. That they're just objects that they can pick up and they're connected to, because it triggers a memory of something, or it belonged to somebody else. And I ask them to feel where it's attached to them, because we're attached to so much, which makes letting go and death hard when we still feel like we're attached to it. I mean, especially when we're attached to earth and life. So when you're invited to not only recognize where you're attached and how you're attached, but then to wrap it up and give it away, it takes it down levels of awareness. And a lot of people say, nah, I'm not attached to anything. I'm cool. And I go, okay, then wrap that up and give it to somebody in the group. Well, I don't want to do that. No, of course you don't, because you're attached to it. But yeah, that's the level. Getting conscious is getting really aware of what's actually happening here. We are attached to a lot of things, like it or not. So, and very few people are able, ready, and willing to let those things go, which is fine. I mean, it's not a must-have. It's just an opportunity to see where this pull is, this longing, this wanting something. And I'm just asking them to just look at it with curiosity, and can you give it a little space, unwrap it a little bit to see, okay, what's really there? What's underneath all of that? Because that's what we swim in when we're dying, when we've had to let go of maybe our sight, our relationships, our ability to walk, the ability to go outside and see the sun. All of these losses, they crash in one after the other. And then, okay, what's left? When all of those things have been taken from us, or we're no longer able to enjoy them.
Yeah.
And what if we can live in that which is underneath all of that all the time? I feel like as I do it, and I teach it because I need to learn it, of course, that's what we teach, right? But I'm getting it now, finally, after 15 years. And my life is becoming so soft and so sweet and so just light. There's nothing, now I'm peeling away all the layers. And I realize the only thing underneath there is just is light and my heart, which is much more available to me now than it ever was before. So being in the death world has brought me to life and helped me find myself and my heart. So I highly recommend it. And the more frightened you are, the more you should lean in.
Absolutely. What are some of the rituals that happen in a home funeral that can help more with the grief process?
Well, actually, the home funeral is a series of little rituals inside the big ritual itself as a home funeral, and of each one is another opportunity to go deeper. So the very first one would be perhaps closing the chakras and anointing the body. Then bathing that's a beautiful ritual in and of itself. Just gently, I mean, it's not a washing, you don't actually need to wash it too much, but you're doing just a gentle cleansing ritual. That's a ritual which involves the family actually touching the body so they get to process it there. Shrouding is another beautiful one. Arranging a place in the home to set the body in honor. There's a ritual right there. How are we going to display her? Are we going to just lay her on the bed? Shall we put a beautiful massage table? So each one of these requires forethought. You know, we're all going to get together. Let's think about this. And I think perhaps the most common in a home funeral is decorating the cremation box. So I'll take the cremation box to the house with all the art supplies. And while the body is laying in honor in one room, the cardboard cremation box is perhaps on the coffee table or the patio table. So everybody who comes to the home to say goodbye to the body has an opportunity to write a message, stick a photo, and just put flowers inside the cremation box. And people have said how healing that was, especially in a sudden death or a suicide where they didn't have a chance to say goodbye. Now they're actually writing on the side of their box the last words that they couldn't say in person. That is really powerful, really powerful. But Other rituals are carrying the box outside to the van. That's a lovely one too. And even doing a procession behind the hearse when it finally moves down the road. These ancient rituals that were just part of the normal process of saying goodbye to a loved one, we've lost. So we've lost those little tiny opportunities to integrate and process and say goodbye and thank you.
I think that's a very powerful place to end. But would you like to share anything else?
Well, there was the one case that I think perhaps we didn't talk about is mothers who give birth to stillborns or infants that live only a few hours, and the agony that a mother whose breasts are now swollen with milk and their child is in a fridge somewhere. I cannot begin to imagine that kind of agony. I mean, that to me is grief crystallized. So, and I think I speak this because my mother, her first child was stillborn, my eldest sister, and she wasn't allowed to see it. And back then, especially in England, it was button it up, go home, you'll be fine, have another one kind of thing. And I know she was never, ever, ever healed that space. There's this hole which is there all the time. So being able to go into the hospital and to help the mother put that baby in a Moses basket and put it in the car and bring it home and have it there in the room and put it in its crib if need be and hold it and sob until you feel, you know, your heart is broken anyway, but to just hold the baby while you're doing it is so powerful and healing and kind. And I feel the opposite is cruel with a woman whose heart is broken. And everyone that I've assisted and helped in doing this, they all say, I can't imagine being able to live had I not had those 3 days. To be able to dress her, put her in the crib, walk around the house with her, just sobbing endlessly. Everyone was scared that I wouldn't stop crying. But she said after 3 days, I could feel it gently subside because this is what the mother would say, I'm done. So I get to put it in its basket, put the lid on because I need to move on. My heart wants to move on. And that is one of the most important places I think we have to provide. We have to provide these mothers this opportunity to take their baby home.
Yeah.
For 3 days, while the milk comes in, while their breasts are bound. But I know it sounds cruel, and unnecessary, but it's the opposite. It's absolutely necessary and completely kind. So
if somebody had, say they had another child at home, in your experience, have the other children who've had if there has been one of those experiences where they bring the baby home, have they shared that experience with the other child?
Yes. Oh yes, the other children, they gravitate towards the dead baby. They need to see it because what they were expecting was to have a baby sister, and now to have this big gaping hole and for people to tell them, well, she died, where did she go, she went to heaven. Kids just they fill in the blanks with their own imagination. But having baby there in the crib and for mom to say he died, they get to have a conversation. So death is like not a scary thing. It's just there. It's still. Oh, why doesn't it breathe? What happened? And so the siblings too can put it to rest in their being. So most people think, oh, I don't want my kid to see a dead baby, but they need to see the dead baby because they were expecting to have a sister and she died. So yeah.
I know, I like the way that you take out those fears for people, take out those taboos, because again, we're so indoctrinated by what we think is normal or what we think is right. So it's just good to hear that from you, Olivia. Yeah.
Well, thank you for asking. Thank you for opening up the conversation and inviting people to look at this a different way.
Yeah, we still have a long way to go, I think, but if we can find people like yourselves locally to us, and I think, like you said, it's definitely lots is changing, and it's quite an exciting time actually to see the shifts and the changes that are happening.
Yes, it is, and that's why I teach it. I teach the Art of Death Midwifery. The 3-part program allows people to come in and learn how to help somebody consciously die, how to prepare for their dying, and also prepare the body, keep it at home for 3 days. It's an intensive, and it probably should be at least 6 weekends, but it's at 3 right now. So
yes, and now the beauty is that people can do it from all over the world. You don't have to be in LA because you're offering it via Zoom. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have a link at the bottom of this, and you can click on to view more of Olivia's work. So I strongly encourage you to do that. And you can follow her at Sacred Crossings on Instagram. Is that right?
Yeah. And Facebook, there's a Sacred Crossings page there too.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tara.
Thank you so much, Olivia. It's been really wonderful to talk to you, and I hope that I will get to see you in person in not too distant future.
I hope so too.
And to everybody at home, thank you very much for watching.